A nuclear war might not begin with missiles on the radar. It could start with a tweet, or a single airstrike in Kashmir. That's the scenario many experts warned about, dismissed for years as doomsday speculation. But the unfolding tensions between India and Pakistan in 2025 are bringing those fears dangerously close to reality. Is this just another border flare-up between two bitter neighbors? Or are we witnessing the opening chapter of a wider geopolitical conflict, one that could drag in not just India and Pakistan, but China, the United States, Russia, and the entire Asia-Pacific power axis? Before we dive into the commentary, please like and subscribe to Worldview Today so you won't miss our unique takes on global current affairs. The rivalry between New Delhi and Islamabad has never truly cooled. Since 1947, the two nations have fought 3 full-scale wars and endured countless smaller skirmishes. But 2025 introduces a new layer of danger. This isn't just about Kashmir anymore. It's about the entire strategic architecture of South Asia being pulled into a high-stakes storm. It started with an Indian military operation codenamed Sindoor, aimed at neutralizing armed groups that New Delhi accused of launching cross-border attacks from the Pakistan-controlled side of Kashmir. In response, Islamabad deployed JF-17 fighter jets, co-developed with China, and mobilized its armed forces near the line of control. The region has since become a war zone. Artillery fire sniper exchanges and even aerial duels have turned the LOC into a daily battleground. Civilians are dying, soldiers are falling, and both governments are fueling the fire with dueling threats. India warns of unprecedented retaliation if Pakistan doesn't back down. Pakistan counters with promises of instant and proportional response. The escalation is faster, sharper, and far more sophisticated than the 2019 Balakot episode. But unlike 2019, this is not just a military standoff. The battlefield has expanded to cyberspace information warfare, market disruption, and strategic signaling. State-controlled media in both countries are amplifying narratives of victimhood. Satellite images, viral footage, and carefully framed Ministry of Defense statements flood social media. But behind the noise lies a more dangerous truth. This crisis is no longer a bilateral affair. Behind Pakistan stands China, a silent but deeply entrenched force in the region. The $6,000 China-Pakistan Economic Corridor (CPEC) connects Xinjiang to the Arabian Sea via the port of Gwadar. It's China's strategic escape hatch from the choke point of the Malacca Strait, where India, the US, and Japan are increasingly flexing control. For Beijing, Pakistan is not just an ally, it is a geopolitical pressure valve. China bankrolls much of Pakistan's defense. JF-17s, HQ-16 air defense systems, diesel-electric submarines, all backed by Beijing. China even assisted Pakistan's nuclear program during the Cold War to counterbalance India. But this time, Beijing is playing an even more refined game. On May 8th, CNBC reported that stock in Avic, the Chinese firm producing JF-17 and J-10C fighter jets, soared 36% within 48 hours of deployment reports. That's not just a financial ripple, that's a signal. A message to global investors: war equals profit. Is China running a proxy war? It doesn't need to say a word. It holds Gwadar. It controls logistics through CPEC, and it supplies most of Pakistan's advanced weaponry. Officially, Beijing urges restraint and dialogue. Unofficially, it's enabling the confrontation while testing a strategic model: indirect influence through infrastructure markets and arms. And if India gets bogged down on its western front, it'll struggle to hold the northern border where Chinese troops clashed with Indian forces in Ladakh in 2020. A two-front pressure scenario is not theoretical. It's a doctrine hinted at in Chinese strategic circles. But it's not without risk for China. If the conflict spills into regions like Balochistan or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where most of CPEC runs, China could face insurgent attacks, infrastructure sabotage, and reputational damage. It wants India distracted, but not at the cost of its own assets. Meanwhile, the United States is watching, closely, but not loudly. Under President Donald Trump's second term, U.S. foreign policy has shifted toward hard realism. Gone are the grand statements about human rights and democracy. What remains is a quiet, calculating posture. After the Kashmir crisis erupted, the White House didn't hold a press conference. Just one chilling tweet. "We urge both sides to show restraint. No mediation. No shuttle diplomacy." CNN noted on May 8th, Trump is not leading an urgent peace initiative, and that's intentional. The U.S. isn't disinterested. It's simply positioning itself to exploit the crisis. Washington sees a multi-level opportunity here. One, to test China's true commitment to Pakistan. If Beijing dives too deep, it strengthens the U.S. argument of Chinese militarized expansion across ASEAN and Europe, justifying broader countermeasures. Two, to restrain India. If New Delhi overreacts and sinks into a protracted war, it becomes less effective in other flashpoints like the South China Sea and Malacca Strait, where the U.S. needs Indian naval presence to challenge China's PLA Navy. 3. To trial its remote engagement model. No boots on the ground, but maximum leverage through logistics, intelligence sharing, and defense supply chains. It's a strategy already in use across Africa and the Middle East. South Asia is its next test lab. But America isn't abandoning Pakistan either. Intelligence and nuclear risk coordination remains active. Washington wants to ensure Islamabad doesn't fall entirely under Beijing's control, especially in Balochistan, where Gwadar is evolving from trade hub to military node. In short, the U.S. is playing a layered game. Keep India inside the Quad, prevent Pakistan from becoming a Chinese satellite, and let both players bleed just enough to reveal their strategic limits. Meanwhile, Russia is attempting a precarious balancing act. Moscow has been India's top defense supplier for decades, accounting for over 60% of New Delhi's military imports as of 2024. But with Western sanctions biting hard due to the war in Ukraine, Russia has quietly opened its arms to Pakistan as a new arms market. That puts Russia in an uncomfortable spot. It can't afford to alienate India, a long-term client and a counterweight to China. Yet it also sees Pakistan as a strategic gateway to the Middle East, Central Asia, and alternative energy markets. More critically, if this conflict spreads to areas with active Islamist networks, especially near the Afghan border, Russia risks a blowback of extremism spilling into its southern flank. Former Soviet republics like Tajikistan and Uzbekistan already serve as buffer zones. But Moscow remembers Chechnya, Syria, and Afghanistan all too well. It has no appetite for another jihadist surge. So Russia's goal isn't to pick sides, it's to prevent South Asia from falling under any single superpower's control, especially not China's. Moscow wants to play the middleman close enough to influence distant enough to avoid entanglement. Smaller nations across South Asia are watching anxiously. For them, this isn't just a military risk, it's an existential one. Afghanistan, leaderless after NATO's withdrawal, could see Taliban or ISIS-K militants flow back into the Durand Line region if Pakistan destabilizes. Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh are squeezed between Chinese and Indian spheres of influence. Sri Lanka, burdened by unsustainable debt from Chinese projects, is in no position to maneuver. A single misstep in Kashmir could trigger refugee flows, sectarian violence, and economic collapse across the region. South Asia is no longer the periphery. It is now a geopolitical crossroads. And every major power, China, the US, Russia, India, and even Japan and the EU, has pieces on this chessboard. India might fire the first shot, but it may be the last one to leave the table, and the price of that seat could be devastating. On the flip side, if India manages to contain the conflict and avoid escalation, it has a chance to recast itself as a responsible regional power. This is critical, especially as New Delhi pushes to elevate its role in the Quad alliance and global supply chains. Since COVID-19 and the US-China trade war, India has attracted billions in FDI, especially in semiconductors, clean energy, and tech manufacturing. War would jeopardize that. Strategic partners would pause. Investors would flinch. But if India holds the line, stabilizes Kashmir without triggering international backlash, and uses the moment to bolster internal security, then it can emerge stronger. No longer a non-aligned nation, but an assertive Asian power with bargaining weight. Pakistan, on the other hand, faces a do-or-die gamble. War would ravage its already crippled economy, deepen its debt crisis, and threaten social order. But Islamabad is banking on its image as defender of Kashmir to rally support from Gulf states and Muslim diasporas in Europe. More cynically, Pakistan may use this crisis to renegotiate the terms of CPEC loans, citing strategic risk to force China into debt relief or grants. But such strategy rests on shaky internal ground. The Pakistani military dominates politics but doesn't fully control the armed Islamist groups near the border. Any rogue attack, even if unsanctioned, could be interpreted as state-backed, and that could spark total war. A terrorist bombing in India linked to Pakistan even indirectly would make full-scale war inevitable. And no one can guarantee that China, India, or even the US wouldn't get dragged in. In this dangerous equilibrium, China once again emerges as the most silent yet active player. No troops. No loud proclamations, but its weapons ports and logistics are everywhere. If the conflict remains low intensity, Beijing has cover to expand its influence, arming Pakistan, hardening Gwadar, and weaving a shadow silk road from Xinjiang to the Arabian Sea. But if war escalates, China faces blowback from jihadist groups, Western sanctions, and financial market instability, all while dealing with a fragile post-COVID economy and declining foreign investment. And what of the U.S.? It won't rush in, but it won't stay out. Washington is coordinating through quiet diplomacy, limited aid, and strategic signaling. If needed, it can lean on Australia, Japan, or multilateral bodies, but only to limit Chinese overreach, not to mediate peace. If the conflict stays contained, the U.S. benefits. China gets distracted. India draws closer to Washington. Pakistan becomes more dependent on U.S. military oversight. But behind all these layered strategies lies a darker truth. The region is sliding into a strategic gray zone where every major power is involved, but no one is accountable. South Asia, once considered the sidelines of Cold War strategy, is now the epicenter of 21st century brinkmanship. 3 nuclear powers, India, Pakistan, and China, share tense, disputed borders. In such a theater, even a tactical miscalculation can have irreversible consequences. A stray missile, a hacked communication, a false radar reading, and the fuse could be lit. This isn't speculation. A classified 2022 report by the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London concluded that if India and Pakistan engaged in open conflict lasting more than 7 days, the likelihood of tactical nuclear weapons being used was high. Under Pakistan's military doctrine of full-spectrum deterrence, nuclear options are not off the table if territorial encroachment is deemed imminent. India, by contrast, adheres to a no-first-use policy, but with a caveat: any nuclear strike from Pakistan would trigger full-scale retaliation. Now ask yourself, what would China do if that line is crossed? Beijing finds itself in the most precarious position it has faced in decades. Its strategic ally could be on the verge of nuclear conflict with its main Asian rival. If it intervenes, it risks direct confrontation with India and, by extension, the Quad alliance. If it stays out, its credibility as a regional power and a CPEC backer crumbles. Unlike the Cold War, there is no effective tripartite hotline between India, Pakistan, and China. No emergency dialogue protocol. No shared strategic trust. In fact, even within these countries, civil-military divides and internal power dynamics complicate response chains. India, for all its democratic institutions, is under immense domestic pressure. Nationalist sentiment is rising. The Modi administration faces calls to respond forcefully, not just from political opponents, but from a public that equates restraint with weakness. Pakistan is even more volatile. The military remains the power broker, but it cannot fully control radical elements or prevent retaliatory attacks from non-state actors. China, insulated by information control, is dealing with internal economic slowdowns and elite fractures between the Communist Party's state-owned enterprises and military hawks. Its outward calm masks a deeply fragmented decision-making process. In such a fractured environment, reactions lag, but consequences don't. A misinterpreted attack, a fake viral video, a deep-fake audio clip of a leader declaring war. Any one of these could become the spark. And unlike other regional wars, a South Asian conflict would trigger instant global fallout. Strategic shipping lanes in the Indian Ocean would be disrupted. Oil, metal, and rice prices would spike overnight. Foreign investment in India, already poised as China's main supply chain alternative, would stall. South Asian diasporas in the US, UK, and Canada could become politically polarized, even targeted. ASEAN states like Vietnam and Indonesia would begin to doubt the credibility of security alliances. If the US doesn't intervene here, would it intervene anywhere? This is no longer a local firefight. This is a global stress test. And while fighter jets roar over Kashmir and artillery shells thunder across the LOC, an even more insidious war is unfolding in the financial markets. Unlike the Cold War, where power was measured in missiles and bases, the 21st century measures strength through capital flows, credit ratings, and commodity volatility. And this conflict, like all modern conflicts, is being watched not just by generals, but by traders. China knows this. The sudden 36% jump in AVIC stock after Pakistan's deployment of JF-17s wasn't just a market reaction. It was a geopolitical signal, a declaration that war is now a lever for economic activation, that military tension can generate financial opportunity. Beijing is trying to build not just a Silk Road of railways and ports, but a war-linked ecosystem where conflict boosts defense contractors, logistics firms, and dual-use tech giants. And in a slowing domestic economy, such artificial stimulus, however dangerous, can be seductive. India has responded in kind. Within 72 hours of escalated LOC clashes, New Delhi approved a $12,000 defense package under its Make in India initiative. Companies like Hindustan Aeronautics and Bharat Dynamics saw double-digit stock growth. The message India, too, understands that in modern warfare, markets move faster than missiles. Even in the U.S. defense indexes ticked up. Not because Washington was preparing to fight, but because every conflict involving U.S.-made weapons or opposing U.S. rivals feeds the American defense sector. Raytheon, Lockheed, Northrop, all quietly monitoring South Asia, not for policy, but for pricing triggers. But this is precisely where the danger lies. When war becomes financialized, when market expectations influence battlefield decisions, then strategic control begins to erode. Generals no longer lead. Traders do. Diplomats lose ground to speculators. If India delays a strike, markets may interpret it as weakness triggering a sell-off. If Pakistan fails to respond, domestic backlash could collapse its fragile government. If China fails to deliver covert support, its entire investment credibility in Gwadar, Sri Lanka, and Nepal may unravel. The center of gravity shifts. Decisions once made in war rooms are now calculated on Bloomberg terminals. And the worst part, markets have no ethics, no memory, and no remorse. They chase volatility. They reward escalation. They punish restraint. In such a reality, a state's ability to win is no longer defined by territory seized, but by narratives controlled, currencies stabilized, and stock indexes defended. So who really holds the power? India might win on the battlefield, but if capital flees and FDI evaporates, it suffers a strategic loss. China might strengthen its proxy, but if the yuan devalues and tech stocks crash, it's a Pyrrhic victory. The U.S. might stay aloof, but if oil prices spike past $100 and domestic inflation returns, the cost will be felt at every gas station from California to Florida. In the age of algorithmic warfare, power doesn't lie in who fires first. It lies in who shapes the tempo of escalation. Who can manage perception while masking vulnerability? Who can turn crisis into leverage without igniting a full-blown firestorm? And here an uncomfortable paradox emerges. The more powerful a nation is, the more its decisions are constrained by market psychology. The bigger the economy, the greater the exposure. Strategic ambiguity is no longer a shield, it's a liability. Welcome to the new era of warfare where wars don't need declarations and victories don't require conquest. Where deterrence is not about nuclear arsenals, but about controlling momentum, message, and money. The 2025 India-Pakistan conflict is no longer a territorial dispute over Kashmir. It is a stress fracture in the global order, revealing how thin the veneer of stability has become, and how quickly a regional fire can trigger a geopolitical chain reaction. India, the rising power, now stands at a crossroad. Does it assert itself militarily to maintain national prestige and domestic support? Or does it step back, preserve its economic trajectory, and risk being seen as weak? Every airstrike, every troop movement, every press conference carries dual weight, one for the enemy and one for the investors. Pakistan, meanwhile, walks the edge of collapse. It leverages conflict to regain regional relevance, bargain harder with China, and rally support in the Muslim world. But its foundations are brittle. A miscalculated provocation could lead not to victory, but to institutional breakdown. Its government is weak. Its military is dominant but fragmented. And its society is increasingly restless. A civil uprising, a terrorist attack falsely attributed, or a military misfire and Islamabad loses control of the narrative, the battlefield, and the nation itself. China, once the silent partner, is now deeply exposed. Its fingerprints are on the weapons, its name is on the ports, and its capital is embedded in every major Pakistani defense and infrastructure project. It doesn't need to invade to be involved, it already is. But this involvement comes at a cost. If war escalates, and Beijing is seen as the hidden hand, it risks sanctions, reputational damage, and strategic overreach. Its economic recovery, already strained by real estate crises, youth unemployment, and capital flight, cannot absorb a new wave of external isolation. If Chinese tech firms, banks, and arms companies become targets of Western pressure, Gwadar won't be a lifeline, it will be an anchor. And what of the United States? Washington, under Trump's second term, is walking a careful line. Support India. Yes. Contain China, definitely. But fight a war in South Asia, absolutely not. Instead, the U.S. is mastering the art of conditional engagement, providing just enough support to keep India in the game, offering just enough restraint to avoid provoking China, maintaining just enough contact with Pakistan to monitor nukes and radicals. It's a strategy built not on moral clarity but on strategic ambiguity, and it is working, so far. Because the real question is not whether Washington will get involved. The question is how long can it stay out before the conflict shapes a world order that the U.S. no longer controls. Meanwhile, Russia hovers in the background, busy with Ukraine but not blind to South Asia. It sells weapons to both India and Pakistan. It seeks to act as a strategic balancer, neither east nor west, but relevant to both. But that posture is fragile. A prolonged war would force Moscow to choose: defend its long-term ally India, or preserve its new arms market in Pakistan. Back China's growing influence or resist becoming a junior partner in Beijing's shadow, the Kremlin's goal is simple: prevent either the US or China from dominating South Asia. Keep the region messy but manageable. Maintain leverage, not loyalty. And then there are the silent players: Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, Bangladesh. They don't launch missiles, but they absorb the fallout in the form of refugees, financial shocks, energy shortages, political destabilization. If war erupts, they will be forced to pick sides not by ideology, but by necessity, by who can offer food, fuel, and credit. And that, too, is power. This is the new reality. A world where alliances no longer require treaties, where wars don't need declarations, where influence is measured not in tanks, but in infrastructure, financial leverage, and narrative control. China doesn't need troops in Kashmir. It has highways, ports, and debt contracts. The United States doesn't need carriers in the Indian Ocean. It has intelligence networks, logistics hubs, and pricing power. Russia doesn't need bases. It has weapons and energy and the ambiguity to use them either way. India, once proudly non-aligned, is now being cornered into great power status, whether it's ready or not. And Pakistan, once courted by both East and West, now finds itself locked in a strategic dependency from which it may never emerge whole. These are not temporary trends. They are the emergent logic of a new global order, one in which conflict is ambient, not episodic, one in which every nation is both actor and target depending on who holds the lens, one in which power no longer flows from the barrel of a gun, but from the supply chains that feed them. In this world, military victory is secondary to perception dominance. Territory is less valuable than logistical access, and war itself may no longer be about winning, but about controlling the pace of decline. So the final question is not, who will win the India-Pakistan conflict of 2025, but rather, who is quietly rewriting the rules of power through the crises of others, while the world is still playing by the old ones. If you value this perspective, consider subscribing to Worldview Today and sharing it with someone who still believes in critical thinking. Thank you for watching.